He thought divorcing me after 40 years would leave me with nothing. He forgot about one very important document. Before you hear my story, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person you trusted most in this world suddenly decided you were worthless? What if after decades of building a life together, they looked you in the eye and said you were nothing but dead weight? I stayed quiet for too long. But when I finally spoke up, everything changed. Don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 65 years old. Wife, mother, grandmother. At least, that's who I was until 6 months ago. For 40 years, I lived in the same house in suburban Ohio with my husband, Robert. We raised two children, Jennifer and Michael. We had our routines, our quiet dinners, our Saturday morning coffee on the back porch. I thought we had our forever. Robert worked in construction management his entire career. I was a teacher for 30 years before I retired. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We paid our bills, took a vacation every few years, helped our kids through college. It was a simple life, and I was grateful for it. But something changed in Robert after he turned 67 last year. Maybe it was retirement. Maybe it was seeing his friends pass away one by one. Maybe it was just time catching up with him. He became distant, irritable. He'd sit in his recliner for hours, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything. I tried to reach out. I suggested we take that trip to Europe we'd always talked about. I asked if he wanted to join a gym together, maybe take some classes at the community center. But everything I suggested was met with the same response. We can't afford it, Margaret. Money doesn't grow on trees. Then came the complaints. I was spending too much on groceries. I was leaving lights on. I was wasting water. Every small expense became a criticism. Every attempt I made to brighten our lives was shot down as frivolous spending. You don't understand money, he'd say. You never had to worry about providing for this family like I did. I bit my tongue. For months, I bit my tongue. Because I loved him. And I thought this was just a phase. I thought he was struggling with aging, with feeling less useful. I made excuses for his behavior to our children when they noticed how tense things had become during family dinners. But the morning of March 15th changed everything. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Robert walked in, fully dressed, car keys in his hand. It was 7 a.m. on a Saturday. I asked where he was going so early. To see David Henderson, he said. My lawyer. My lawyer. Not our lawyer. My lawyer. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why do you need to see a lawyer, Robert? He turned to face me, and his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. Because I'm done, Margaret. I'm done pretending this marriage still works. I'm done carrying you financially. I'm done with all of it. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. What are you talking about? I want a divorce, he said, matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. I've already talked to David about it. You'll need to find somewhere else to live. I stared at him. Robert, we can work through whatever this is. We can go to counseling. We can… No. He cut me off. I'm 67 years old, Margaret. I don't have time to work through anything. I want to enjoy what's left of my life without worrying about supporting someone who contributes nothing. The words hit me like physical blows. I contributed nothing. I raised our children. I worked for 30 years. I took care of this house, this family. With my money, he interrupted. This house is in my name. The cars are in my name. The bank accounts are in my name. Everything we have, I built. And I'm tired of sharing it with someone who just exists. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. This man I'd shared a bed with for 4 decades was looking at me like I was a stranger, worse than a stranger, like I was an inconvenience he'd finally decided to eliminate. I've been more than fair, he continued. I'll give you 6 months to figure out your next steps. After that, you'll need to be gone. He walked toward the door, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Margaret. Don't think you're going to take me to the cleaners. David's already explained how these things work. You'll be lucky to get alimony for a few years, maybe enough to rent a small apartment. But this house, the savings, the investments, that's mine. That's what happens when you've never really contributed anything. The front door slammed behind him, and I was alone in the kitchen with broken ceramic scattered around my feet, and 40 years of my life suddenly reduced to nothing. I don't remember cleaning up the coffee mug. I don't remember getting dressed or leaving the house. But somehow, I found myself sitting in my car outside the office of Patricia Williams, a lawyer I'd looked up on my phone. She was the only attorney in town who specifically mentioned representing women in divorce cases. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. When I finished telling her my story, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. Margaret, she said gently, I need to ask you something. Do you have any documentation of your financial contributions to this marriage? Bank statements, investment records, anything in your name? I shook my head. Robert handled all the finances. He said it was easier that way, that I didn't need to worry about it. Patricia frowned. What about the house? Do you remember signing mortgage papers? Yes, of course. We bought it in 1985, right after Michael was born. Do you remember what you signed? Was it just as a co-signer, or were you listed as a co-owner? I tried to think back. It had been so long ago. I don't remember exactly. Robert handled most of the paperwork, but I signed everything he told me to sign. Patricia pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. I'm going to need to run a title search on your property. I'm also going to need copies of all your bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, everything. Can you get those for me? Robert keeps all of that locked in his office at home. He's never let me see the details. Patricia's expression darkened. Margaret, that's a red flag. In a marriage, both spouses have a right to know about family finances. The fact that he's kept you in the dark for 40 years suggests he might be hiding something. Hiding what? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. The next few days were the worst of my life. Robert barely spoke to me except to remind me of my 6-month deadline. Our children called, confused and upset. Jennifer cried on the phone, begging me to fight for the marriage. Michael was angry at both of us, unable to understand how we'd gotten to this point. Dad says you knew this was coming, Jennifer said during one particularly painful conversation. He says you've been living off him for years without contributing anything, and now you're trying to take half of everything he worked for. That's not true, I whispered. I worked, honey. I contributed. But you didn't make much as a teacher, Mum, and you've been retired for 5 years. Dad's been supporting you this whole time. Her words cut deep because part of me wondered if Robert was right. Had I been nothing but a burden? Had I really contributed so little that my presence in his life had become worthless? Then Patricia called. Margaret, she said, I need you to come to my office right away. I found something. I drove to her office with my hands shaking. When I walked in, her desk was covered with papers, copies of documents I'd never seen before, financial records, property deeds, bank statements going back decades. Sit down, Patricia said. Her tone was different, more serious. We need to talk. I sat, bracing myself for more bad news. Margaret, do you remember your grandmother's house? I blinked, confused by the change of subject. Of course, Grandma Helen's house on Oak Street. She left it to me when she died in 1987, but we sold it right after that to help with the down payment on our current house. Patricia slid a document across the desk. This is the deed to your current property. Look at the names on it. I looked down at the paper. There were two names listed as owners, Robert Collins and Margaret Collins. I don't understand, I said. Your husband lied to you, Margaret. This house isn't just in his name. It's in both your names. You own 50% of it. My head started spinning. But he said, he lied. Patricia pulled out another stack of papers. Here's what really happened. When you sold your grandmother's house in 1987, you received $45,000. That money didn't just help with the down payment. It was the entire down payment on your current home. Your inheritance bought that house. I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was telling me. It gets better, Patricia continued. Do you remember the life insurance policy you inherited from your grandmother? The one worth $30,000? I nodded slowly. Robert said we should invest it for retirement. We did some digging. That $30,000, invested in 1987, is now worth over $400,000. And guess whose name is on that investment account as the original depositor? Mine? Yours. Legally, that entire account belongs to you. Robert may have managed it, but the initial investment came from your inheritance, which makes it separate property under Ohio law. I felt like the room was tilting. Are you saying... I'm saying your husband has been lying to you for years about your financial situation. You're not some dependent wife living off his charity. You've been a major contributor to this family's wealth from day one. That $400,000 investment account? That's just the beginning. Patricia pulled out more documents. Your teacher's pension, which you never touched because Robert said you didn't need it? That's been accumulating interest for 5 years. It's worth $180,000 now. And because you worked for 30 years, you're entitled to Social Security benefits that are substantial. My hands were shaking as I looked at all the paperwork. How much are we talking about? Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Margaret, your individual assets, not counting what you're entitled to from the marital property, total approximately $650,000. You're not poor. You're not dependent. You're financially independent, and you have been for years. Your husband just convinced you otherwise. I started crying then. Not tears of sadness, but tears of rage. 40 years of being made to feel worthless. 40 years of being told I didn't contribute anything. 40 years of being grateful for scraps from a man who had built his empire on my foundation. What do I do now? I asked. Patricia's smile grew wider. Now? Now we call your husband's lawyer and set up a meeting, because Robert Collins is about to learn what happens when you try to discard someone who actually holds most of the cards. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Patricia advised me to let her do most of the talking, but she also prepared me for what was coming. Your husband is going to be shocked, she warned me. He's been operating under the assumption that he holds all the financial power in this relationship. When he learns the truth, he might get angry. He might try to negotiate. He might even try to reconcile. Are you prepared for any of those scenarios? I thought about it for a long moment. Was I prepared? A week ago, I would have begged Robert to take me back. I would have accepted any scraps he was willing to throw my way just to avoid being alone at 65. But something had changed in me. Maybe it was learning the truth about my financial situation. Maybe it was realizing how deeply I'd been manipulated and lied to. Maybe it was just finally seeing Robert for who he really was. Not the man I'd fallen in love with 40 years ago, but the cruel stranger who had called me worthless and demanded I be grateful for his charity. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. The meeting took place in David Henderson's office downtown. It was a fancy place with dark wood paneling and leather furniture, the kind of office designed to intimidate. Robert was already there when Patricia and I arrived, sitting confidently next to his lawyer like a man who knew he held all the winning cards. He barely looked at me when we walked in. David Henderson, on the other hand, greeted Patricia with professional courtesy and gestured for us to take seats across from them at a polished conference table. Well, David began, I think we all know why we're here. My client wants to dissolve his marriage to Mrs. Collins and settle the financial matters as quickly and fairly as possible. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Before we discuss any settlement, I think there are some financial realities that need to be clarified. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his expression remained smug. Look, I've been more than fair. I'm willing to pay alimony for 5 years, enough for Margaret to rent a small apartment and live modestly. She'll also get half of whatever's in our joint checking account. That's generous, considering she hasn't contributed financially to this marriage in decades. Actually, Patricia said calmly, let's talk about contributions. She slid a document across the table to David Henderson. This is the original deed to the Collins property, showing that Mrs. Collins is listed as a co-owner, not a dependent. David looked at the paper, and I saw his confident expression waver slightly. Furthermore, Patricia continued, the down payment for that property came entirely from Mrs. Collins's inheritance from her grandmother. Her separate property was used to purchase what Mr. Collins now considers his house. Robert's face was turning red. That was 40 years ago, and we agreed. You agreed to lie to your wife about her own financial contributions? Patricia cut him off smoothly. But let's continue. She slid another document across the table. This is Mrs. Collins's current investment portfolio, originally funded by her inheritance in 1987. Current value: $427,000. The room went silent. Robert was staring at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. There's also Mrs. Collins' teacher's pension, currently valued at $180,000, and her Social Security benefits, which begin next month at $1,800 per month. David Henderson was frantically taking notes, but Robert just sat there with his mouth slightly open. So, Patricia continued, let's talk about a fair settlement. Mrs. Collins is prepared to offer the following. She'll take her rightful half of the marital home, which, given that her inheritance provided the down payment, could actually be argued to be more than half. She'll take her own investment accounts, her own pension, and her own Social Security benefits. Mr. Collins can keep his retirement accounts, his vehicles, and his own Social Security benefits. Wait. Robert finally found his voice. Wait just a minute. That house is worth $450,000. If she takes half, plus her investment account, plus her pension, that's over $600,000. I'd be left with almost nothing. Patricia smiled sweetly. Mr. Collins, I believe those were your exact words to my client just last week, that after the divorce, she'd be left with almost nothing. Turnabout is fair play. Robert turned to me for the first time since we'd sat down. Margaret, you can't be serious about this. We've been married for 40 years. We built this life together. You can't just take everything. I looked at this man who had called me worthless, who had made me feel like a charity case for years, who had been planning to discard me like an old piece of furniture, and for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. "Robert," I said quietly, "you told me I never contributed anything to this marriage. You told me I was dead weight. You told me I should be grateful for whatever scraps you were willing to give me." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You were wrong about all of it. I built this life just as much as you did. I just let you take credit for it." "But Margaret, I'm not finished." My voice was stronger now. "For 40 years, I trusted you to handle our finances. I believed you when you said I didn't need to worry about money, that you had everything under control. I believed you when you said this house was yours, that the investments were yours, that I was lucky to have a roof over my head." Robert's face was pale now. I I was protecting you from having to worry about. "You were controlling me," I interrupted. "You were making sure I felt dependent on you, so I'd never question your authority or your decisions. Well, I'm questioning them now." I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. "Patricia, please proceed with the settlement as discussed. I think we're done here." As we walked out of the office, I could hear Robert calling my name, his voice panicked and desperate. But I didn't turn around. For the first time in 40 years, I kept walking. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Robert tried to contest the settlement, but the financial documentation was ironclad. In the end, he agreed to the division Patricia had proposed, though not without trying one last manipulation tactic. He called me 2 weeks before our final court date, his voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Margaret, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, I know that. But we're both getting older. Do we really want to spend our final years alone?" For a moment, just a moment, I almost wavered. 40 years of habit die hard, and there was still a part of me that wanted to believe this man could change, could become the partner I'd once thought he was. But then I remembered his words from that March morning. "I'm tired of sharing it with someone who just exists." "Robert," I said gently, "I don't want to spend my final years feeling worthless in my own home. I'd rather be alone and know my value than be with someone who sees me as a burden." "I never meant—" "Yes, you did," I said. "And that's okay. It taught me something important about myself. It taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew." I hung up the phone and never looked back. Today, 6 months after that terrible March morning, I'm writing this from my new home. It's a small cottage about 20 minutes from where Robert and I used to live, with a garden I'm planting myself and a reading nook by the window where I spend my mornings with coffee and books I never had time to read during my marriage. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. More importantly, I'm free. Free from walking on eggshells around someone's moods. Free from being made to feel grateful for things that were partly mine to begin with. Free from pretending that a relationship built on lies and control was love. My children have slowly come around to understanding what really happened. Jennifer visits every Sunday now, and we've grown closer than we were during my marriage. Michael still struggles with the divorce, but he's beginning to see how much happier and more confident I've become. And Robert. I heard through friends that he's been trying to date, but it hasn't been going well. Turns out that when you've spent 40 years practicing how to make someone feel small and worthless, it's hard to suddenly become charming and respectful with new people. I don't wish him ill, I really don't. But I also don't miss him. What I thought was love for all those years was really just habit, fear, and conditioning. Real love doesn't make you feel like you have to earn your place at the table. Real love doesn't keep score of who contributes what. Real love doesn't threaten to throw you away when you become inconvenient. I'm 65 years old, and I'm just now learning what it feels like to love myself, to know my worth, to walk through the world with my head up instead of apologizing for taking up space. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not fighting for my marriage sooner, if I regret letting it get to the point of divorce. The answer is no, because fighting for a marriage requires two people, and I was the only one who ever showed up for that fight. What I would tell any woman listening to this story is simple. Know your worth. Know your finances. Don't let anyone, not even someone you love, convince you that you're less valuable than you are. And if someone tries to discard you like you're nothing, remember, they might just be surprised to learn who's actually been keeping them afloat all along. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your voice matters. Your contributions matter. You matter. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Thanks for listening.